on probability. For example 4, they tell us that 32% of the passengers on the Titanic survived the sinking. They don't ask us to write down our notation anywhere, so I'm just going to find a little spot to write this down. So probability of survived is 0.32. And then 19.1% were women, so probability female is 0.191. Then 74.4% of the female passengers survived the sinking. So be very careful on this one. Think about it for a moment. Is this talking about all passengers? Nope, it's talking about of the female passengers. So instead of everybody, we're going to have this given group, the females. The probability of surviving is 0.744. Now we're ready to go. Compute the probability the passengers female and survived. So probability female and survive. We've had enough practice at this now, and think multiplication, but we cannot just do S times F. We don't know if they're independent, but we're going to start off thinking that way. Probability of S times probability of F. Since they're not independent, or it's unknown if they are, we need to go back in and add a given on one of these. Up here we know S given F, so that's the one I'll add the given information onto. Now we're ready to go and plug in our values. That first conditional probability, 0.744. This second one, 0.191. And putting those two together, you're going to get 0.1421. And then the next one, what's the probability a passenger died during the sinking? So that's like our complement rule, opposite of surviving. So 1 minus the probability of surviving, or 1 minus 0.32, and we get our 0.68. All right, let's do a final example in the form of a table. This is looking at the total number of place kicks, if they were successful or not, based on kind of the pressure of the game, if it was going to be a lead changing or non-lead changing kick. So part A in general was an attempt successful, so probability of successful is, notice there's no given information, so just out of the overall total, how many were successful? This 1,262 out of our total 1,425. Again, leave it like that if you want, or write it as a decimal will be fine as well. You would get 0.8856. Next one, what's the probability? It was lead changing, so probability lead changing. So the lead changing kicks, we have 359 of those out of our 1,425 kicks altogether. Again, leave it as a fraction, unsimplified, or write it as a decimal. 0.2519. Given an attempt was lead changing, so there's our keyword again, use our vertical line. And that given information goes after the line, and specifically we're given it's lead changing. What's the probability it was successful? So just kind of thinking here, if it's lead changing, maybe there's more pressure and you're more likely to mess up. I don't know. Let's take a look. So given lead changing, so we're just looking at this first column. Those are the lead changing kicks. So out of those 359, 291 were successful. So 291 out of 359. And that's going to give you something like 0.8106. And yeah, that theory kind of looks like it pans out. Successful overall was about 89%. If it's lead changing, the pressure's on, you mess up a little more, only 81% of those were successful. So it looks like whether it's lead changing or not does make a difference on the success of the kick. So that's exactly our next question. Are these independent? So why not, let's use the ones we were just looking at. Successful given lead changing. Is it the same as successful? So we just saw it's not. If it's lead changing, your chance of success is a little bit lower. It's not the same as if it's just success in general. If it's lead changing, it knocks down the chance of success a little bit. So are these independent? Absolutely not. And here's our explanation. That equation, the left hand and right hand sides are not equal. Being lead changing makes a difference in the chance of success. Are they disjoint? So again, be very clear about your definitions of independent and disjoint. Disjoint means, can they happen at the same time or not? So here, chance of being lead changing and successful, can they happen, or does it have a 0% chance of happening together? Lead changing and successful, we can look up at the top and see what that is pretty quickly. There's 291. There's no given information, so it's out of the overall total. So 291 out of our overall total of 1,425, which is definitely not zero. Of course we can have successful attempts that are lead changing. So these are not disjoint or not mutually exclusive. Okay, so independent test if the and is equal to the two events multiplied together. Disjoint test is the and equal to 0. And this concludes our different topics and examples on probability.